The rain fell like melted iron, hissing as it struck the roofs of the sleeping town. Each droplet carried with it the scent of rust and old prayers, the kind whispered by men who had forgotten the gods but still feared their silence. Beneath the tolling of the midnight bell, a lone figure crossed the square. His lantern swayed in the wind, its light trembling upon the cobblestones like a dying soul. He was a merchant's apprentice, no older than 20, his hands blistered from work, his eyes hollow from hunger. Yet tonight, he carried something far heavier than any sack of grain or spool of silk. Wrapped in linen, pressed against his chest, lay the mirror, a relic from the monastery vaults, found beneath a slab of stone etched with forgotten Latin, sealed away as if the earth itself wished to forget it. The abbot had forbidden its unearthing. He had warned that some reflections were not meant for the living. But men in need of gold are seldom deterred by the ghosts of warnings. As the apprentice walked, thunder rolled like a drum of judgment. His breath came in quick bursts, fogging the air before him. Somewhere behind a shutter, a dog whimpered. The church bell continued to toll, not for worship, but for omen. When he reached the mayor's hall, he hesitated. The building loomed over the square like a sleeping giant, its windows dark, its door carved with cherubs whose eyes had been worn smooth by centuries of rain. He knocked once. The sound vanished into the night. Then again, louder. From within, footsteps approached. A latch turned. "Do you have it?" The mayor's steward, pale and thin as parchment, stood in the doorway. The apprentice nodded, holding out the linen bundle. The steward took it without a word and beckoned him inside. The hall smelled of beeswax and damp wood. Candles flickered along the walls, their light shivering on tapestries depicting battles long forgotten. At the far end, beside a great stone hearth, stood the mayor himself, Lord Terrell of Veldrin, a man whose wealth was matched only by his fear of losing it. He turned slowly as the apprentice approached. "So, this is the thing," he murmured, voice heavy with both awe and suspicion. The steward laid the mirror on the table, unwrapping it with reverence. The linen fell away to reveal a surface so dark it seemed to drink the firelight. For a moment, it showed nothing, no reflection, no gleam. Then, slowly, like a breath fogging glass, an image began to form. A face, not the mayor's, nor the apprentice's, but a woman's. Pale as ash, crowned in gold, her eyes burning with a sorrow that felt ancient. The apprentice gasped and stepped back. "It moves," he whispered. Lord Terrell leaned closer. His voice faltered. By God, the face smiled faintly. Not a kind smile, but one of knowing. The hall grew colder. The flames in the hearth bent inward, as if drawn toward the glass. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the face was gone. The mirror once again was black. Silence stretched across the hall. Even the rain seemed to pause. "It belonged to her," said the steward finally. "The Queen of Avara." Lord Terrell's eyes narrowed. "The cursed one?" "The same. They say she demanded that no servant look upon her without permission, that she shattered every mirror that showed her growing old. The last one she kept, this one, she had blessed with the blood of a saint. Or so the story goes." The mayor frowned. "Stories. Every relic has one, but this will make me a fortune." The apprentice's voice trembled. "My lord, it should be buried again." The abbot said. Lord Terrell silenced him with a glance. "The abbot is a relic himself. This mirror will bring pilgrims, scholars, nobles. The church may curse it, but it will not turn away coin." He turned to the steward. "Prepare the east room. Display it there come dawn." The apprentice, dismissed, was led out into the rain. Behind him, the great doors closed with a sound like stone sealing a tomb. That night, the storm deepened. The wind howled down the chimneys, carrying whispers that sounded like laughter. The candles in the mayor's hall guttered and died. Somewhere near midnight, the steward heard the faint sound of weeping. He followed it through the corridors, his candle trembling in his hand. The sound led him to the east room, where the mirror now hung, draped again in its linen shroud. He froze. The cloth moved. It rose and fell, as if something beneath it were breathing. The steward stepped forward, hand outstretched. "My lady," he whispered. He did not know why he said it, only that the words felt drawn from his throat by something unseen. He pulled the cloth away. The mirror was no longer dark. It showed the room behind him perfectly, except that in the reflection he was not alone. A woman stood just behind his shoulder, crowned in gold, eyes burning. He turned. Nothing. When he looked back, her hand was upon his reflection's shoulder. The reflection smiled. The steward screamed. The sound was brief, swallowed by thunder. By morning, the east room was empty. Only the mirror remained, its surface calm, its linen gone. The steward was never found. When the mayor awoke, the town was still under storm. The square had flooded. The church bell had cracked. He summoned his guards, demanded the mirror be moved to his chambers, that no one else touch it. But as he stood before it, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. In its depths, he saw not his own reflection, but the faces of those he had wronged. A farmer he'd ruined with taxes, a beggar he'd turned away, his own wife, pale and unsmiling. He struck the glass with his cane. It did not break. "Show me gold," he roared. "Show me glory." The mirror rippled like water. For a moment, it did show him gold, mountains of it, then fire, then ashes. By the next evening, the mayor's servants found his chamber door locked from within. When they broke it open, the hearth was cold, the window wide. Lord Terrell was gone. Only the mirror stood there, bare, unwrapped, reflecting the empty room. Days later, the townsfolk whispered again. They said the rain had stopped the very hour the mirror vanished, that a traveler had been seen riding north with a covered object on his horse. Others said it returned itself to the monastery vault, waiting for the next fool to find it. And in the square, where the apprentice once walked beneath the tolling bell, a single shard of glass lay in the mud, black as night, glimmering faintly, as if it remembered. The town slept again, but not easily. The sound of rain was gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier, the sound of breath on glass. And sometimes, when the moon was high, those who passed the mayor's hall swore they could still see a face in the window, smiling back. The valley of Altenkirch lay silent beneath a shroud of white. Snow had fallen for 9 days without pause, thick, unbroken, and soundless. Beneath it slept the bones of miners, the carcasses of oxen, and the shattered ribs of carts half buried in drifts. Only the bell tower remained untouched, a black spire rising from the storm like a finger pointing toward judgment. At its peak, the silver bell hung motionless, its lip rimed with frost. But as the first dawn of the feast of Saint Agnes broke, a pale circle of light trembling through mist, the bell began to move. Slowly, deliberately, as if stirred by a breath too ancient to belong to man. Its toll rolled through the valley, a long, low moan that did not end where sound should end, but carried through the firs, over the frozen river, across the ridges. It was not heard so much as felt, in teeth, in blood, in marrow. It was as though the mountain itself were crying out from within. The miners who had forged it were gone by then, their tools abandoned in the cursed shaft. But the villagers remembered the night of its casting, how the flames in the foundry burned green and the air tasted of salt and metal. They said when a molten silver was poured, it hissed and whispered, not in words of men, but in something older, a language that trembled in the walls and coiled in their throats like smoke. They had prayed it was a blessing. It became a curse. After the first ringing, nothing grew. The soil turned sour, the wheat bent and blackened before the blade, and the river swelled with a cold sheen that killed the fish before they could rise to the net. In the barns, milk curdled overnight. In the cradles, infants stopped breathing. And still, the abbot refused to silence the bell. "It wards off what dwells beneath," he had said, standing before his frightened flock, the candlelight trembling on his face. The silver was drawn from cursed earth, yes, but consecrated by holy fire. To silence it would be to open the gate. But when the bell rang again, a wolf appeared at the edge of the orchard, black, lean, its eyes reflecting the church light. Behind it came another, then 10, then 100. They did not howl. They simply watched, their breath rising in soft plumes as if waiting for the bell to end. Nights became longer. The wind grew thin, and in their dreams, the villagers saw the tunnels. They dreamt of walls dripping with water and the echo of picks far below. They dreamt of hands, pale and long, reaching from the rock, beckoning them downward. In the dreams, there was always the sound of the bell, but muffled as though ringing through stone. Old Gertrude, who lived by the river, awoke one morning with her hair turned white. She swore she had heard the whispers again, the same from the night of the casting. She said they spoke her name over and over until dawn broke and the sound of the bell drowned them out. The abbot ordered her confined to the chapel, but when he came to see her at dusk, she was gone. Only her rosary remained, frozen to the floor. By the third winter, the frost itself had changed. It no longer formed delicate lace upon glass or branch. It crept instead in strange symbols, curling patterns that no one could read, but everyone feared. The villagers began marking their doors with ash, whispering their prayers to the Virgin between chattering teeth. When the bell tolled on the eve of Candlemas, Father Ulrich, the youngest monk, was seen weeping beneath it. There is something in the sound, he confessed to the abbot. It speaks not of salvation, but of hunger, as if something in a mountain calls to be fed. The abbot struck him across the face. Faith does not tremble, he said. But that night, he too heard it, in the silence after the ringing. A second tone, faint and low, rising from beneath the earth. Then spring came. The snows melted, but the thaw brought no warmth. The river ran black, slick with something oily and foul. The bell tower's reflection wavered in its surface like a wound that refused to close. When the villagers came to draw water, they found fish turned inside out, their silver scales glimmering like coins beneath the surface. The abbot blessed the stream, but his words turned to steam as they left his lips, and the smell of rot filled the air. The next morning, the church doors were open. Inside, the abbot was found kneeling before the altar, his eyes glazed with frost. His mouth was filled with something metallic, small silver shavings that glinted in the candlelight. The bell rang once more that day, though no hand pulled the rope. One by one, the villagers fled. Some tore the mountain pass, others into the forest. None were seen again. Their houses remained open to the wind, doors swaying, curtains stiff with ice. Chickens froze where they perched. Oxen lay dead in their stalls, eyes open to the rafters. Only one man stayed, Mathis, the smith. He had forged the bell himself, though he never spoke of it. He said he could not leave while it still hung. It was my fire that gave it voice, he told the empty square. I will see it silenced. That night, the villagers who lingered in the woods saw the tower blaze, a column of fire in the snow. They heard the bells cry once more, twisted and broken. Then nothing. When the smoke cleared, the tower still stood. The bell still hung. But Mathis was gone. Only his hammer remained, embedded in the frozen earth at the tower's base. Years passed. Moss grew over doorways. The fields became wild meadows. Travelers who crossed the valley spoke of a bell that rang without wind, its tone carrying through the fog like a lament for souls long forgotten. They said that if you listened closely, beneath the ring you could hear another sound, faint like the turning of a wheel deep underground. Some claimed it was the echo of the miners still digging. Others said it was the mountain breathing, restless beneath its shroud. No one dared climb the tower. No one dared touch the bell. On still nights, when the moon rose white over Alton Kirch, the sound would come again, soft at first, then swelling until the stars themselves seemed to flicker with its pulse. The valley would hold its breath. The trees would not sway. The river would not move. And for a moment, it would seem as though time itself waited, listening for what came next. The marshes of Dorset do not forget. Even now, centuries later, the land remembers. Its breath is slow, damp, heavy, the kind that clings to one's ribs and whispers of the dead. When the floodwaters rose that year, the townspeople thought it was just another punishment from the skies. They had lived half their lives under rain, their fields half drowned, their crops pale with rot. But when the waters receded, something surfaced from the mud, pale as bone, gleaming as though the sun itself had chosen to touch it. It was an ivory crucifix, small enough to fit in a man's hands. The priest, Father Aldwin, found it lodged between two reeds, half buried in black silt. He lifted it slowly, careful not to breathe too hard upon its face. The figure of Christ was intact, unbroken, unblemished, save for the eyes. The eyes were carved open, too open, not with sorrow or mercy, but with something that seemed to watch. Aldwin carried it back to the village, his hands trembling beneath the weight of what he called a miracle. They placed it in the chapel, a humble place of damp stones and flickering tallow light, and adorned it with lilies, fresh and white. Candles burned through the night. Bells rang. The villagers came barefoot through the marsh paths to see it, kneeling, crossing themselves, whispering thanks. For a time, there was peace. Then came the silence. First, the birds stopped nesting in the chapel eaves. The swallows vanished. Their old mud homes, left hollow and still, gathered cobwebs like forgotten prayers. The frogs fell quiet too, their throats unbubbling beneath the cattails. The nights became empty. Even the wind moved differently, dragging its feet across the reeds. And then the people began to fall ill. It started with fever, faint, almost dreamlike. Then came the marks, small, circular patterns upon the skin, faint as ripples on water. The villagers thought them harmless until they grew, spreading like rings on a pond after a stone has fallen. They turned to Father Aldwin for deliverance. He told them it was a test of faith, that the crucifix had come not to save, but to cleanse. His sermons grew louder, wilder. He preached of purification, of divine eyes that see beyond sin. The candles burned longer, the prayers harsher. Every night, the chapel trembled with voices, chanting, pleading, rising beneath the crystal chandeliers that swayed from the rafters. The smell of wax thickened the air. Smoke clung to the beams like shadows that refused to leave. But the sickness spread. Children whimpered in their sleep. Mothers whispered rosaries that tangled in their shaking fingers. The marsh seemed to listen. It always did. Then one evening, Father Aldwin vanished. They found his cassock near the river's edge, stiff with salt, his sandals half buried in the silt. The crucifix, however, was gone. No one spoke his name after that. The villagers boarded the chapel doors, but it was too late. The lilies had long since withered. Mold crept up the walls. The silence thickened until it became something alive, a thing that waited just beyond the light. And then the flood returned. The rain came in sheets that swallowed sound. Rivers bled into fields. The chapel's foundation groaned. And when the water burst through the oak doors, the crucifix appeared once more, drifting, slow, pale, turning in the current as though guided by an unseen hand. They say it glowed beneath the moonlight. Some claim it smiled, not with mercy, but with farewell. But that is only what the survivors whispered, those who stayed long enough to see the marsh reclaim the town. For years after, travelers spoke of strange lights by the river, of candles burning beneath the flood surface, of faces reflected in the water that were not their own. Fishermen found ivory fragments in their nets, smoothed by time, etched with faint eyes that seemed to open wider with every tide. They would toss them back into the depths, muttering prayers, unwilling to keep what belonged to the drowned. No one rebuilt the chapel. It stood half-buried in reeds, its bell tower bent, its cross leaning like a weary sentinel. When the wind passed through its hollow frame, it made a sound like breath, shallow, uneven, waiting to speak. Some say the crucifix had never been holy at all, that it came from older hands, carved not in faith, but in fear, a relic from when the marshes were still pagan ground, and spirits of the fun were worshipped beneath the moon. In those days, ivory was not sacred. It was binding. The eyes of such figures were left open so that the gods within them could not sleep. Father Aldwin, in his zeal, had simply awakened what the marsh had tried to forget. The sickness, the silence, the flood, all of it a slow remembering. When the moon is high over Dorset, the land glimmers faintly, as though the water never truly left. There are nights when the air smells of lilies again, when the frogs still, and the birds hold their song mid-flight. If you listen carefully, the sound of dripping water becomes a rhythm, patient, deliberate, almost like a heartbeat. And within it, you might hear a whisper, a prayer caught between breath and drowning. The marsh doesn't speak in words. It remembers through reflection. Look closely into the black water, and you may see the chapel door half open. Candles flicker inside. Their flames bend towards something unseen. And there, just beneath the surface, something pale turns slowly, caught in the current. The eyes are still open. Somewhere, far downstream, villagers tell of another town, one untouched by flood, where the air is sweet and the bells still ring. But sometimes, in their chapel, when the candles are low, the priest's voice falters. He feels a draft from nowhere. He swears he hears water dripping behind the altar. Perhaps that's where the crucifix came to rest. Perhaps not. Faith is a river, after all. It carries what we love and what we fear, often to the same place. And in the dark bends of Dorset's marsh, where the earth breathes like something alive, belief still lingers, half prayer, half curse, whispering through the reeds. Beware what the flood returns. The port was small, a wound of stone and salt cut into the western coast. The sea never slept here. It breathed and whispered against the wooden hulls, wrapping each night in mist thick enough to drown the moon. The fishermen spoke little, their words swallowed by the hiss of waves and the groan of their nets. But on one pale morning, as gulls circled like restless spirits, a single crate arrived, sealed in wax the color of dried blood. Inside lay the relic, a chalice heavy as gilt. Its rim was laced with gold leaves, so thin they trembled at a breath. Its base was carved with symbols that no priest nor scholar could name, spirals that seemed to move when caught by candlelight. The air around it felt charged, as though it had been pulled from a storm. The crate had come from a sunken monastery, a ruin dragged up by divers chasing the remnants of drowned faith. They said the sea had hidden its stones for 2 centuries. Yet the chalice looked untouched, unaged, as though the depths had preserved it in devotion. When Father Marin saw it, he crossed himself 3 times. This was meant to stay buried, he whispered, his voice trembling through the incense smoke. No relic that comes from the sea ever returns clean. But the aldermen, proud, desperate men who ruled by fear of the unseen, saw only divine opportunity. The port had suffered. Catches dwindled, storms struck too early, and the salt seemed to creep farther inland each year, whitening the crops. They declared the chalice a gift, a sign that heaven had not forgotten them. It was placed on the altar that very Sunday. The church was a narrow vessel of stone, its ceiling blackened by centuries of candles. The villagers gathered beneath it in silence, the smell of brine still clinging to their clothes. When the priest raised the chalice, its golden edge caught the first light of dawn. The wine trembled within it, dark as the sea's heart. And when it touched their tongues, ah, the sweetness! It lingered like incense, a taste too holy to name. They left the Mass in tears, certain that grace had visited them. That night, even the waves were calm. The wind turned gentle, brushing against the sails like a mother's hand. But grace, they would learn, has a hunger of its own. By the third service, the sweetness had begun to change. The wine grew sharp, metallic, like blood left too long in the sun. The villagers still drank, out of faith or fear, but they began to avert their eyes from the chalice. The priest's hands, once steady, now trembled. He said little during Mass, his voice growing hoarse as though the relic drew breath from him. Then came the storms. They rose without warning, walls of black water shattering the horizon. Boats vanished without splinter or scream. Those who survived said the sea had grown eyes, countless, shimmering eyes watching from beneath the waves. Father Marin began to waste away. His skin paled, his fingertips blackened as if bitten by frost, though the air outside burned with summer heat. He wrapped his hands in linen and prayed through the nights, whispering words that melted into the candlelight. But every morning the bandages were wet, not with blood, but with salt water. One night, unable to bear it, he went to the shore. The moon hung low and red, and the tide hummed a sound he swore he'd heard before, faint like a choir beneath the surface. The chalice sat beside him, heavy and cold, its carvings pulsing faintly like veins beneath skin. He lifted it once more, looking into its hollow. "You were meant for gods," he murmured, "not for men." He waded into the surf and cast it into the deep. For a moment, silence. Then, a rush of wind, a crack of thunder. The waves rose in fury, clawing at his legs, pulling him under. When the storm broke, the chalice was gone. But by dawn it had returned. There it lay, half buried in sand before the church steps, glistening like a wound reopened. The villagers found Father Marin kneeling beside it, salt drying on his face. He said nothing, only looked toward the sea, as if expecting an answer that never came. Days turned to weeks. The church began to crumble, stones splitting, beams sagging. Moss crept along the altar. The villagers stayed away, muttering prayers at their doors. The chalice remained, catching the rain in its golden mouth. Children swore they saw faces reflected in its surface, pale, twisted faces whispering beneath the ripples. The aldermen, terrified of losing the town's faith, ordered it sealed away. They carried it to the crypt below, where the air was thick and the ground slick with years of moisture. They buried it beneath slabs of limestone, marking the place with a cross. But at night, the sound returned, a low hum, like the sea breathing through the stones. The fishermen heard it in their dreams, the same note rising through the tide, calling them to shore. Some began walking in their sleep, their feet dragging through the sand toward the ruins. They woke with salt on their lips and whispers still echoing in their heads. Then, one morning, the church collapsed, its spire cracked like bone, the walls folding inward as if drawn by some invisible weight. Dust filled the air, and the sea roared, retreating only when the last stone had fallen. When the storm cleared, the villagers found what remained, a ruin washed clean by rain, and there, in the center, the chalice once more. Half buried, unbroken, it gleamed beneath the moon, filled not with wine, but with seawater, dark, still, and endlessly deep. Now, years later, the port lies quiet again. The wind moves through its empty streets like the breath of something sleeping. Only a handful of fishermen remain, men too old or stubborn to leave. They mend their nets in silence, their eyes often wandering toward the church's skeleton. They say that on nights when the tide is high and the moon hides its face, the sea hums softly in one direction, toward the ruins. And if you stand close enough, you can feel it in your chest, that deep, trembling note, as though something beneath the waves is drinking again. The fishermen no longer take communion. They drink only water, and even then, sparingly. Some have filled their wells with sand. Others have taken to crossing themselves before sleep, whispering to the dark, "Not tonight," because sometimes in the corner of the eye they still see it, a flash of gold beneath the tide, a shimmer that catches moonlight like blood, a relic that refused to drown, and the sea, endless, patient, remembering. The wind came first, not as a storm, but as a sigh. It drifted down from the black slopes, carrying with it the scent of iron and pine sap, whispering through the bare branches that framed the village below. The people had long grown used to the mountain's moods, but that evening the air seemed to hold its breath. Fires burned low, dogs whimpered in their sleep, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a figure appeared upon the road, bent, hooded, and slow. The pilgrim walked as though he had carried centuries on his back. Each step sank into the snow like a confession. In his hands he held a small wooden icon. The Virgin, carved so crudely she seemed half-formed, as if the sculptor had lost faith before finishing her face. The wood was dark, blistered by time, and around her hollow eyes ran a faint sheen of oil, like tears long dried. When he entered the village, the sound of the wind changed. It dulled, as though pressed beneath a weight of silence. The few who watched from their doorways said later that the snow around his boots refused to melt, that the candles near the chapel flickered when he passed. He asked for no bed, no food, only to rest before the altar. The priest, wary yet moved, opened the chapel doors. Inside, the air was cold enough to bite the lungs. The icon was placed upon the altar, and the pilgrim knelt. He did not speak, only traced the sign of the cross with fingers cracked and bleeding. And yet, as the hours passed, the villagers began to murmur. The lights seemed dimmer that night. The hearths burned slower, the lamps wept wax, and even the moon hung lower over the mountain shoulder. Still, they said this was holy. Suffering was the truest prayer. For weeks, the pilgrim remained among them, moving like a shadow through the frost. He mended fences, prayed with the dying, whispered to the children in tongues they could not name. The villagers brought him bread and salt, leaving them at the chapel door, never daring to step too close. The Virgin's face grew darker still, as if absorbing the smoke from every soul's small grief. Then came the old woman. She was the last who remembered the famine, when they had buried their dead beneath frozen roots and prayed for spring that never came. Her eyes were thin with years, her hands scarred from ash and labor. One night, as the bells tolled for evening mass, she claimed she saw it, the icon weeping, not tears of water or oil, but of fine gray dust, soft, like the ashes from burned pages. They fell upon the wooden floor, forming crosses that glowed faintly in the candlelight before vanishing. She cried out, summoning the others, but when they arrived the chapel was still. The pilgrim sat beside the altar, his face hidden in his hood. "What have you brought us?" she asked him. He did not look up. Instead, he whispered something that none could hear, save for one word that clung to the cold: atonement. That night, the dreams came. Every villager, from child to elder, found themselves trapped within the same vision. They stood inside walls of fire, hearing voices that called their names from behind the stones. Some said the voices were angels. Others swore they were the dead. And through it all, a woman's song threaded the dream, low, mournful, unending, until the fire consumed the sound itself. When dawn broke, a thick smoke curled above the hill. The chapel was gone. No flame, no embers, only stone blackened as if by centuries of soot. The altar had cracked in two, and in the center, half buried in snow, lay the icon. Its face had changed. The Virgin's eyes were open now, not carved, but hollow, as though something within had burned its way out. The pilgrim was nowhere to be found. Only his footprints led away from the ruin, vanishing where the forest began. In the days that followed, silence clung to the valley like a shroud. The bells no longer rang. The priest wandered the ruins in madness, muttering that he could still hear chanting from beneath the stone. The villagers tried to bury the icon, but each time they did, the earth spat it back up, uncovered by rain, or by snow melt, or by the trembling of the ground itself. So they built a small shrine at the edge of the village, hoping to appease whatever spirit had taken root among them. Travelers began to avoid the mountain path, for the wind there carried strange sounds, faint hymns sung in a language no one dared to name. The story spread, as all curses do. They said the icon had once been carved by a monk who disobeyed his order, who sought to paint the virgin sorrow as truth rather than glory. They said the wood was taken from the beams of a burned convent, where nuns had perished singing through smoke. They said every century the icon sought another home, a place hungry for salvation, where faith and fear lived side by side. In time, new settlers came. They found the ruins, the cracked stones, the shrine half buried in moss. None remembered the pilgrim, nor the winter of ashes. But when they rebuilt the chapel, they placed the old icon above the altar once more, believing it to be a relic. And still, the candles sputtered. Children grew afraid of the shadows beneath its frame. Shepherds returning at dusk swore they heard singing in the fog. When storms passed over the valley, the clouds seemed to gather there first, folding themselves around the steeple like dark wings. And sometimes, just as the rain began, they said the icon's face gleamed, as if polished by invisible hands. Generations would come and go, each whispering a different name for the same fear. Some called it the Virgin of Smoke, others the Mother of Sorrow. But the oldest still remembered the first pilgrim, the man who arrived when the light dimmed and left behind silence. Now, when travelers pass through that mountain road, they notice how the wind shifts. It hums almost tuneful, almost prayer. And if one listens too long, beneath the storm's breath they might hear it. Voices, layered and distant, singing of something lost. A mercy denied, a devotion twisted, a faith that burns instead of warms. And somewhere within that unseen choir, the sound of a footstep, soft, steady, moving ever forward. The pilgrim still walking, perhaps, toward another village, carrying his burden and the dark virgin with him. Because faith, once scorched, does not die. It travels. Fog drifts low across the forest floor, coiling between the roots like breath searching for a body. The dawn is gray, the kind that forgets to arrive. Beneath the stillness, a shovel strikes bone. A gasp cuts through the mist. The sisters have been gathering herbs for the infirmary, humble weeds for fevers and sores, when the iron edge caught something pale. It was not stone, but smooth with the curve of a rib. The youngest nun lifted it gently from the earth, a comb, carved from bone, delicate and glimmering with damp soil. Upon its spine, faint lines traced the shape of a cross worn by centuries of sleep. "It is holy," whispered Sister Elena, her voice trembling. "The rib of a saint." The abbess said nothing. Her eyes, cloudy with years of prayer, lingered on the comb as though she recognized it. A relic perhaps forgotten by time, or something far older, wrapped in the rags of sanctity. They carried it back through the fog, their steps soft on the moss, the forest closing behind them like a wound healing shut. At the convent, life moved with the rhythm of bells, the morning prayer, the evening hymn, the gentle rustle of habits in the cloister. The relic was placed upon the altar, and for 3 days the nuns prayed for guidance. On the 4th, they began to use it. The comb was given to Sister Elena, whose duty was to tend to the orphans. The silent children left at the convent gates with no names, only small tokens of the world's neglect. She brushed their tangled hair each morning by the fire, humming hymns in a voice too soft for sorrow. The comb's touch was strange, warm, almost living. When it passed through a child's hair, static seemed to rise from their skin, as if the air itself listened. The children slept soundly that first night, their dreams full of mothers they barely remembered. But on the seventh night, a girl began to scream. She spoke of veiled women whispering at her bedside. They leaned close, she said, their breath cold as the moon. Another child awoke the next night, weeping, saying the same. Soon, all of them tossed in feverish sleep, their lips moving as if reciting names no one had taught them. The sisters prayed harder. The abbess fasted. Candles flickered without wind. Doors swayed open, slow and deliberate, like hands parting curtains. In the refectory, a cup would roll from a table and shatter, and always, always, the sound of faint rustling, as though unseen habits brushed past the walls. Sister Elena tried to burn the comb once, but the flame drew back as if afraid. By the second month, silence became unbearable. The air thickened with dread, heavy as incense. The children's laughter, once bright, grew brittle, forced, echoing strangely against the stone. And yet, the comb remained warm. On certain nights, when the sisters lit their lamps, they swore the bone shimmered faintly, not reflecting light, but breathing it like an ember beneath skin. The abbess began to see things. She would pause mid-prayer, her hands trembling, her eyes fixed on something invisible behind the altar. Once, she claimed to hear her own name spoken from the empty corridor, in a voice she had not heard since childhood. Still, she said nothing to the others. Faith, after all, was built upon silence, the courage to endure the unknowable without question. But even faith has limits. One evening, a storm rolled over the forest, not with thunder, but with whispers that slipped through the cracks of the convent walls. The air smelled of iron and candle wax. The sisters gathered in the chapel, their voices quivering in psalms. Lightning flashed through the stained glass, painting the saints in blood and fire. And then came the sound. It was not the wind, not the rain. It was the comb, falling from the altar to the floor, the impact ringing like a bell through the hall. The abbess stepped forward, her rosary clutched tight. Her shadow stretched across the cracked stone, trembling. She lifted the relic. Its teeth were red, faintly, impossibly red. A voice, soft and low, breathed her name. When dawn came, the sisters found her kneeling before the altar. Her eyes were open, wide, unblinking. Her hair, once dark as ink, had turned white as snow. The comb lay beside her, shattered into 7 pieces. No one touched them, not at first, but the children would not enter the chapel. They said the air hummed there like someone still praying. 3 days later, the nuns carried the fragments back to the forest. Each shard was wrapped in linen and buried where the relic had first been found. The ground was cold, reluctant. As the last handful of earth fell, the youngest sister thought she heard something stir beneath, a sigh, long and slow, as though the forest exhaled. They prayed again, for mercy, for peace, for the quiet to return. But nature does not always forgive the trespass of resurrection. Spring came early that year. Snow melted into rivers that ran clear and fast, feeding the moss and the wildflowers. Yet where the relic had been buried, the soil remained black and barren. No trees grew, no birds nested. The air there stayed colder than anywhere else in the forest, trembling faintly as though something beneath still dreamed. At night, travelers who lost their way near the convent spoke of hearing a sound, a faint hum, almost human, like breath drawn between lips. Some said it was the wind caught in hollow roots. Others claimed it was the comb itself, still whispering through the earth, combing through the silence of the dead. Years passed. The convent aged with time, its stones weathered, its candles fewer. The orphans grew and left, carrying the weight of dreams they could never explain. Sister Elena remained, her hair now as pale as frost. Sometimes she would walk into the forest alone. She would stop where the ground refused to grow, close her eyes, and listen. and though she never spoke of it, those who watched from the gates swore her lips moved, softly, tenderly, as if answering something beneath the soil. The fog never lifted from that place. Even in summer, when the rest of the forest glowed green, that hollow stayed gray and still. And when the wind passed over it, it made a sound not quite like a whisper, not quite like a song, but something between the two, something like memory itself. A hum that might be prayer, or warning, or both. And so the forest kept its secret, for bones remember, and relics, once touched by faith, never truly sleep. The village lay silent beneath the pale breath of dawn. Frost clung to the splintered beams and broken shutters, as if time itself refused to move forward. Only the wind stirred, whispering through hollow homes, lifting ashes from long cold hearths. Somewhere beneath the cobbler's shop, beneath cracked leather scraps and tools turned to rust, a sound, faint, deliberate, echoed, the shifting of wood, the sigh of something long forgotten. It was here that the chest was found. The men who unearthed it said the nails had blackened like bone char, and when the lid cracked open, a strange scent escaped, not of death, but of theater dust and old perfume. Inside, nestled like relics from another world, were masks. Dozens of them, carved from thick leather and painted with colors that still glimmered beneath centuries of grime. Each mask bore a face, not carved crudely, but sculpted with aching precision. Grief, joy, rage, serenity. Emotions so real they seemed to breathe when the light shifted. The troupe who found them were wanderers, actors, jesters, vagabonds of the stage. They had traveled from plague town to plague town, performing for coin and bread, their laughter echoing in streets where laughter had long been banned by grief. When they found the masks, they believed it was providence. The leader, a man named Elric, said they were a gift from the forgotten gods of theater, a sign that the world still hungered for stories. He wiped the dust from one, a mask painted in the hue of a setting sun, its lips curved in eternal sorrow. "They will make us immortal," he said, and the others believed him. Their first performance with the masks was in the ruins of a monastery. Villagers gathered, drawn by rumor and desperation. The troupe donned the masks, and something changed. The air thickened. The voices grew deeper, truer. Even the children stopped crying. When Elric, wearing the face of serenity, spoke his lines, the sound carried like a prayer through the broken arches. For a moment, the plague, the famine, the silence, all seemed to vanish. But when the play ended, one of their number did not remove his mask. They called to him, laughed at first, thinking a jest, but the man did not move. Only when Elric pulled the mask from his face did they see the truth. His skin had hardened beneath it, pale and slick, as though the mask had melted into him. The eyes beneath were not his own. They buried him in the courtyard that night, the mask sealed in a jar of pitch. But Elric kept the others. He said the show must go on, and it did. From town to town, their fame spread. The masks gave them something unholy, presence, power. The crowds wept, shouted, fainted in ecstasy. Each face they wore seemed to pull emotions from the world itself, to summon memory and pain. The masks became their second flesh. They no longer acted, they were what they portrayed. But after every performance, another was missing. A girl named Lyra vanished first, the youngest of them, who had worn the mask of joy. Her laughter had once healed hearts. Now it echoed faintly from the empty wagons at night, thin and cracked, like porcelain breaking. Then came Tomas, who had worn rage. They found his mask nailed to the stage beam one morning, his eyes painted upon it, wet and new. The survivors whispered that the masks spoke to one another between acts. Elric heard them most. Hollow voices, arguing, one laughing, one weeping, one hissing in the dark. He began to sleep beside them, saying they needed to be soothed, that they feared abandonment. And slowly, the troupe began to fear him. By winter, only 3 remained. They performed for no one now, only for themselves in deserted chapels and burnt courtyards. The masks had fused to their souls. When Elric finally spoke of ending it, his voice trembled like a man praying to a god he had betrayed. "They feed on us," he said, "but they give us life in return. We cannot destroy what has already become part of us." Still they tried. They built a pyre outside a ruined abbey, piled it with timbers and banners, soaked it in oil. Elric placed the chest atop it, one mask at a time, whispering their names like lost friends. When he lit the fire, the flames rose high and fierce, and for the first time in months, the wind was warm. But then came the smoke. It twisted upward, black and gold, and within it faces, dozens of them, flickering, gasping, smiling. The troop fell to their knees as the smoke rose toward the heavens, and in that moment, the mask spoke one last time, a sound like applause from the depths of the world. When the fire burned to ash, the masks were gone. So were the actors. Only the chest remained, warped and empty. Years passed. The plague lifted, the village rebuilt. But the stories lingered, of the troupe that vanished, of the cursed faces that once breathed on stage. Now, in abandoned theaters, people say the air feels different after dark, as if an audience still waits unseen. Stagehands swear they hear faint applause when no one is there. And sometimes, when a wind shifts and the torches flicker, a mask appears, lying open upon the stage. Always different, always waiting. Its painted eyes seem to follow, patient and longing. No one knows who places them there. Some say Elric still wanders, his face burned away, searching for players brave enough to join the troupe once more. Others believe the masks themselves walk, drawn by the scent of performance, by the hunger for emotion, for flesh, for life. But those who have seen one up close say something else entirely. They say the masks do not simply wait, they listen. To every whisper, every breath, every sigh from the audience. They learn the faces around them, memorizing expressions, building new ones in secret. And when the time comes, when the curtain falls and silence fills the room, they choose. One face among the crowd, one soul strong enough or foolish enough to wear them again. The fire that once freed them still burns, somewhere unseen, not in wood or oil, but in the hearts of those who crave to become more than themselves, to slip into another skin, to feel the applause that never ends. And perhaps that is the truest curse of all, not that the masks steal flesh, but that they offer something greater than any mortal can refuse, to be remembered. The theater remains empty now. Dust dances in thin beams of moonlight. A door creaks softly in the wind. On the stage, a single mask lies waiting, its mouth slightly open, as if about to speak. Somewhere in the rafters, a faint clap echoes. Once, twice, then silence. And as the torches fade, the mask's smile deepens, painted lips glistening like fresh blood beneath the ash. It began with a sound, soft at first, so soft it could have been mistaken for the settling breath of stone. A faint click, followed by the echo of silence, so deep it seemed the moor itself was listening. At the edge of that desolate moor, where the earth drinks fog like blood and the sky is forever the color of old pewter, stood the manor of Brackenmere. Its walls leaned with the weight of centuries. Its foundations were said to rest upon the bones of an older faith, a pagan altar long buried by time, where the smoke of human offerings once climbed to nameless gods. The house did not welcome strangers. It loomed, as if aware of its own endurance. Wind crawled through its broken teeth of stone, and the heather that surrounded it never flowered, only shivered beneath the cold breath of the highlands. It was to this house that Lord Alfric of Brackenmere returned, a man proud in bearing, with the kind of arrogance born from bloodlines that believe themselves chosen. His armor was polished, his crest unblemished, his mind sharp with ambition. To him, This manor was not ruin, but inheritance, proof that his name had survived when others had turned to dust. He ordered renovations at once. He wanted fires rekindled in the old halls, the chapel reopened, the hearthstones lifted and relayed. But when the masons' pride loosed the great stone before the hearth, their hammers struck not soil, but iron. It was a key, small, black, and strangely perfect in its shape. Its teeth were worn smooth, and its loop was bound tightly with strands of dark hair, fused as though by heat. The men dropped their tools and crossed themselves. They said it was a witch's relic, a charm from older times, a curse left buried to guard the dead. But Alfred only laughed. He held it to the light, turning it slowly. The iron gleamed not with rust, but with a deep red sheen, as if it had been pulled from a forge still alive. Superstition, he said. Every relic is only as cursed as the fear it commands. And with that, he hung the key around his neck on a chain of silver, a trophy of dominion, a symbol that all secrets beneath his roof now belonged to him. That night, something changed. The wind, once constant, fell still. The air thickened with the scent of iron and rain, though the sky was clear. And deep within the walls, the faintest sound, a chime, like metal brushing against stone, echoed once and then again. At first, it was only the servants who noticed. Doors creaked open of their own accord. Candles guttered as if smothered by invisible breath. Shadows lingered a little too long, bending in ways that light could not explain. By the third night, the hounds refused to sleep near the hearth. They stared at it instead, hackles raised, eyes glassy with terror. Lady Elswith, the lord's wife, began to dream. In her sleep, she walked the manor's halls, only to find them longer than they should be. Corridors twisting into darkness, staircases leading down instead of up. In one dream, she followed the sound of weeping, soft and endless, until she reached a door that had not been there before. A door of black oak, carved with unfamiliar symbols. When she woke, her pillow was damp, as though tears had passed through from another world. Lord Alfred laughed at her fears. "A house only holds the ghosts we give it," he said, though his own sleep had grown shallow. He began to pace at night. The servants heard his boots dragging across the floorboards at the same hour each night, just before the bell of midnight, just after the wind died. He started marking the walls with chalk, drawing symbols that no one recognized. When asked their meaning, he only said, "They keep the silence away." The servants whispered that the Lord had been touched by the thing he'd unearthed. One by one, they left, until only the steward and his wife remained. Then came a night the fire would not die. It burned long past dawn, the flames pale as moonlight, licking the stones though there was no wood left. Alfred stood before it, trembling, his eyes wide and glassy. She called. He whispered. "Who?" asked Lady Elswith. "The one beneath," he said, and touched the key at his throat. "It doesn't open a door. It remembers one." She begged him to throw it away, to cast it into the marsh, but he only smiled, a slow, hollow smile. "What is buried calls to what is bound," he murmured. "If I return it to the earth, she will follow." The next morning, the steward fled. He swore that during the night he had heard footsteps beneath the floor, slow and dragging, circling the hearth from below. He said he saw dust falling from the stones, as if something were breathing beneath them. That evening, Lady Elswith found her husband in the chapel, kneeling before the altar. The key rested upon the open pages of an old family Bible. Around him, candles burned low, their wax melted into shapes that looked almost like fingers. He was praying, but the words were wrong. Harsh, wet. It was not Latin, nor English, nor any tongue she had ever heard. The sound of it made her skin crawl, as if every syllable carried the taste of rust. When he saw her, he rose and said only, "I'm almost there." In the days that followed, time lost its shape. The clock stopped. The light in the hall never quite reached the corners. Even the air felt stretched thin, as though the house itself were holding its breath. And through it all came that soft, maddening sound, the metallic chime of the key, turning against nothing. Alfred no longer spoke to anyone. He spent hours by the hearth listening. Sometimes he wept. Sometimes he laughed until his voice broke. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. His eyes grew sunken, yet there was a feverish gleam in them, the glow of a man who had glimpsed something that stripped him bare. "Do you see?" he whispered once to his wife. "The fire isn't burning wood anymore. It's burning memory." One night, Lady Ellsworth woke to silence, so complete it rang in her ears. She rose from bed and saw a light spilling beneath the chamber door, red, pulsing like blood seen through skin. She followed it down the corridor, the air thick and warm, tasting of metal. The great hall was alive with light. The hearth blazed though the firewood was long gone, and around it, the stones glowed with living color. Marks crawled across them, glowing symbols that shifted and breathed. In the center of it all stood her husband. His arms were raised. The key gleamed in his hand. His mouth moved, spilling words that sounded like screaming underwater. She tried to run to him, but the air thickened, as though she were wading through water. The flames dimmed, then brightened, then turned black. There was a sound, a click, the same as that first night, but deeper now, more final. Then came the light, blinding, cold, absolute. When it faded, Lord Alfric lay on the stones. His eyes were open, staring into the dark above him. There was no wound, yet the air smelled of burnt flesh. Beside him, the key pulsed softly, faintly warm, as though it still carried his heartbeat. The hearth still burned, but no heat came from it. Only a sound, faint, rhythmic like breathing. Lady Ellsworth screamed until her voice broke. They buried the key at dawn. The priest refused to touch it. He had the gravediggers lower it into a box of ash wood, sealed with wax and bound in prayer. But when the grave was covered, no grass grew over it. Only thorns, black and sharp, rising from the soil like the ribs of something buried alive. Lady Ellsworth left that same evening, her eyes hollow, her voice gone. The manor was boarded shut, its windows nailed with iron. For years, it stood alone, sinking inch by inch into the moor. Yet even ruin does not forget. Travelers still speak of Brackenmere Manor. They say that on still nights, when the fog rolls low and the wind dies, you can hear it breathing, a faint exhalation that moves through the heather, as if the earth itself were dreaming. Some claim they have seen a dim red glow where the hearth once stood. Others swear they've heard the chiming of a key, carried on the wind, fading and returning like a heartbeat. A shepherd once followed the sound and found himself before a patch of earth where the thorns grew thickest. He bent close and swore he heard something turning beneath the ground. The villagers avoid the path now. They say the land is wrong there, that compasses spin and candles die. Even the birds will not cross the moor when the mist rises. Old men say the curse began not with the key, but with the arrogance that unearthed it. That Brackenmere's sin was not the relic itself, but the pride that believed it could master what it did not understand. And so, the story endures, told in whispers beside tavern fires, carried by wind across the heath. For those who listen closely, the message is always the same. Some doors were never meant to open. Some relics do not unlock, but awaken. And the past, when disturbed, does not stay buried. It waits. It waits in the silence between breaths, in the space between footsteps, in the shadow that lingers just beyond the fire's edge. And when the wind dies across the moor, when the night grows heavy and the earth begins to hum, that is when it begins again. The faint click of a key turning in a lock that no longer exists. The sigh of a door opening where no door should be. And then, only silence.